Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paula Crider. I'm the Midwest Board, and it's my privilege to introduce this clinic to you. I suspect that, as am I, you were here because the music of David Maslanka has impacted you at a very profound level. And today we have a wonderful array of very distinguished clinicians. We're privileged to have Dr. Maestro Gary Green, Maestra Mallory Thompson, Maestro Stephen Bolstad. And I just told this young man that the last time I saw Matthew Maslanka, he was 4 years old, and I was very disappointed that he didn't remember me. But
I tried real hard.
The panel was led by Dr. Threinen. Would you please welcome all of our distinguished guests?
Well, thank you. On behalf of the Big Ten Band Directors, we're very thrilled that you're here. We want to welcome you to this session. The goal of today's session is a couple of things. First of all, we want to converse about the impact that Mr. Maslanka had on the lives of the panelists, on the lives of many people who have performed his music, and in the community of bands and music in general. We'd like to share some experiences on what it was like to work with Mr. Maslanka as a composer in residence. Many of these people had that opportunity. How he interacted with conductors, how he interacted with ensemble members, and maybe how he interacted with the audience. We also want to hopefully give you some opportunities, some information to gain greater insight into interpretations of his music. And I'd like to give the caveat that everyone's going to have a different perspective on that. You do have a handout, which I don't want you to look at right now. I know once you say that, people look down. Don't look, but you have a handout. Of course, this is also available on the app. And that we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it gives a bit of insight through the perspective of Matthew and how to interpret his music. But again, everyone here on the panel will have their own opinions on that, and I hope we'll have the time to share those things with you as well. And then ultimately, to learn more about the man, his ideals, and his purpose. So we thank you again for being here, and before we get started, I'd like to share a video with you. I think many of you know that David had opportunities to work with all kinds of ensembles and all kinds of people throughout his career. And actually, I'd like to say that in selecting a panel, it was incredibly difficult because so many of you have so many stories and so many interactions with the man, David Maslanka. And just to select a handful of people was a big challenge. But I wanted to find a diverse panel and people that would offer very different perspectives. So again, there are many of you in the room that you could probably say, well, I knew David for 20 years and we had this wonderful relationship. So we certainly recognize that, and I want to make sure that you all know that it was difficult to narrow it down to just 4. So to start our session, I thought we would hear from the man himself. And this is courtesy of Glenn Adsett at Hart College. And this basically a pre-concert talk, if you would, before Symphony No. 4 performance happened in 2017. So we hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Glenn. It's been an honor, pleasure, and privilege to be here and to work with these fine players in making music. I wanted to offer the idea that musical tone is one of the most powerful forces in the world, maybe even the most powerful. We don't tend to think of it that way. But contemplate the idea of musical tone by itself. At the core of each tone is peace. And that is a cumulative function of a piece of music. It creates peace. When people are performing together, they are at peace with themselves and with one another. They're at peace with the community. The community comes and participates in peace. This is the core of what's going to carry us through the current extremely difficult times. A couple of things I wanted to say. One is that one of the profound carriers of peace in this Symphony No. 4 is the melody, the doxology. And this is a melody which has come through, I don't know how many generations, probably hundreds of generations of people to achieve the form that it has, which is very simple. Everybody knows that tune. Every tone in that tune and succession of notes in that tune has come through the hearts and souls of literally millions of people to be that form here and now. So it is the gift of the deep past to the present moment. And it is our gift in this present moment to the future. And I want to offer one of the story about peace. This is a story I like to tell. I live in western Montana, in the city of Missoula. It's a small town, 60,000 people in the mountains in the west. Every third year there's a choral festival, international choral festival there. Choirs come from all over the world and stay for a week and perform in multiple venues. It's quite an event. Some number of years ago, a choir came from Lithuania, and in introducing them, the conductor talked about the political situation in Lithuania, which at the time had to do with communist domination. And he said, talked about the quality of anger and frustration that was experienced by people there. And he said, as choir members, we had this feeling that we had a choice of picking up a gun and shooting someone or singing. And he said, we choose to sing. That is a powerful, powerful statement. We choose to sing. So you can think of it in your life. Do I choose to shoot? Do I choose to sing? We choose to sing. This is not national news. This is not going to be national news, but it is that undercurrent of living energy which is going to grow and grow and grow and actually allow us to move into the right relationship with this planet. So, okay, I think that's probably enough to say, and I hope you enjoy the music.
So we'll hear from our panelists now. The first question I have is for Matthew, his son. It's a very easy one. Can you please give us the proper pronunciation of David's last name?
Well, I'll tell you what. We say Maslanka. It's Polish. I believe the original pronunciation is something along the lines of Maslanka. There's like a little thingy on the S and a little thing on the L. It means something like buttermilk or dairy farmer. So, people from a long line of peasant stock. But they landed in Massachusetts and bred and adopted the accent, and it turned into Maslanka. I will respond to Maslanka. I'll respond to hey you, frankly. But just I don't care what you call me, just call me.
Pretty straightforward. Okay. This is for each of the panelists. Please share your professional or personal relationship that you had with David and provide any story you're willing to share to get us started. Steve, would you like to go first?
Okay. Well, I met David when I was a DMA student at the University of Texas. This would have been the early 90s. And the first time I met him was my second year there when Jerry had him in for a mini residency, Jerry Junkin, that is, when we had a mini residency for a performance of In Memoriam. And of course, by that time, Jerry had already commissioned David to write a piece, and that piece became Symphony 4. At the time, he didn't know exactly what he was going to write yet, but it became Symphony 4. So then my third year, I had that wonderful experience of being around when that amazing piece was created, to be there at initial rehearsals and then to have David there and sharing his thoughts about the music, and of course all the premieres after that. And at that point, it was a no-brainer. I need to do my thesis on this piece of music. So I decided to do that. And then this miracle-like thing happened. I ended up getting the job at the University of Montana, which is in Missoula, Montana, which was just a really special thing. And I think all of you who have had a chance to work with David know that special things just kind of happen around him. This is my first real big experience with that. And if you really think about what are the chances of that happening? I'm a typical third-year DMA student. I'm desperately trying to find a job. Had some interviews and didn't get the jobs. And of course, at the time, I'm horribly disappointed in all that. And then magically, this University of Montana job opened in Missoula. And I was lucky enough to get that job. And it's hard not to believe that there aren't greater forces out there kind of guiding our lives. And of course, David had some thoughts like that as well, if you are able to access those things. Anyway, I had 13 great years at Montana. Of course, we played a lot of his music. I'm sure everybody knows that David loved to be around people playing his music, and he was extremely giving of his time, so he was in our band room all the time. Excuse me. And it was just such a wonderful thing to be able to interact with him on a fairly regular basis for 13 years. And I guess you would think that I would have written my paper right away. I didn't. 1 year turned into 2, turned into 3, and 6 or 7 years later, I finally got around to doing it, which was not a good thing from the University of Texas perspective. But it really turned out to be an amazing thing for me because I got to know David not only as a composer, but I got to know him as a person and as a family man, and had contact with their family on a fairly regular basis. Matthew played in my band the first time we did Symphony 4. So anyway, it was just an amazing experience, and I think I think it helped me write a better paper. I don't know if that's true or not, but I like to think so. And then jump a number of years later. In 2007, I moved to where I am now, James Madison University, and of course we had David in a couple times and did a lot of his music. But just a year and a half ago, I had this incredible feeling that I needed to do Child's Gardens of Dreams, and that's a piece that always intimidated me. I was quite frankly too chicken to do the piece, and I had never done it. But something told me that I needed to do that piece. And it worked out for David to come and spend 3 or 4 days with us as we prepared that. And as always, it was just this absolutely amazing experience. And so in hindsight, I'm just so grateful that I had that time to make music with David.
Dr. Thompson.
Before I talk about my experience with David, I'm curious, how many of you have heard his music? Okay, how many of you have played his music? How many of you have conducted his music? How many of you can say that you honestly have been deeply moved by his music? Okay, that's really special. And I would say we're going to share our experiences, but I would urge you to talk with each other about yours, because he belongs to all of us. So I'm just going to say a couple of things relating specifically to some of the repertoire that I knew best and loved most of his, and some experiences that happened as a result of doing that music. His work in memoriam, I had one of the more powerful experiences I've ever had in a performance. One time when we played this at Northwestern, and the piece ends very, very, very softly with just a single note being held on the organ, and you want to hold it for a long time because of the meaning of the work. And it ended, and I wanted to hold the silence in the hall, which I did. And then I brought my arms down slowly. The audience was still quiet. The group's looking at me a little anxiously. I put my baton on the music stand, arms down, still quiet. I break my posture, the conductor version of That's All, folks. I break my posture, still quiet. The audience didn't want to let go of the piece. They didn't want to let go of the moment. One time when we were doing his Symphony No. 4, there's just something so incredibly pure and beautiful about that opening horn solo that people in the audience told me afterwards they didn't know why, but they just started weeping at the very beginning of the piece. And my last experience with David was, I was so fortunate when I conducted the California All-State, was that 2016? 2016. It was a special anniversary for them, and to celebrate it, they commissioned David to write a piece. And he was there, and we got to share in that experience together, and share a lot of conversation about his music, and just conversation for fun. And it was incredibly special, as it always was, to watch him work his magic with those students. You know, as you could tell from this, David is his own special person. And it was just really remarkable to watch him with those students and to share the experience of bringing that piece to life with him in the room. That's something I'll always treasure.
It's just dumb luck that I'm sitting up here. I just happen to be at the right place at the right time. How many folks in here are high school band directors? Yeah. So I was a high school band director in Spokane, Washington. I taught there for nearly 20 years. I had no intention of ever being a college band director. Then one night, at Bill Hockettle's house, who was a band director at Eastern Washington University and a phenomenal saxophone player, now in Louisiana. He had a tape, a cassette tape. You guys know what cassette tape is? And it came from John Hayner's premiere performance of Child's Garden of Dreams. And I was sitting there in that room. We just finished trying to play the Doll Symphony with my band. And it's a correct statement. And I love those kids. And I loved working on that music, and it was challenging for me to understand what this great man was trying to say in his music. Then I heard Child's Garden of Dreams, and I just didn't know what to do. I was living in Spokane. Sounds like that didn't happen in Spokane. And so I wanted to know what that was about and how that could possibly be. So this is now between 36 and more years ago. And I knew that having worked on the doll, this was something that really was magic. It doesn't even begin to say it. It was something inside of you have stuff that you want to know about. That's where stuff happens. At least for me. And so I thought, well, I better go try to find a college job. I don't have a doctoral degree. Somebody asked Flip Wilson, you guys probably don't know who Flip Wilson is either. He used to do this church guy. He said, where'd you learn to preach? He said, from the church of what's happening now. But I applied for the job, and I got the job at the University of Connecticut. I could stay in Spokane. There was a job available, college job, where I could go to Spokane, or to go to Connecticut to take the job at the University of Connecticut. 3,000 miles away from my home, I didn't know anybody. My wife, the greatest human being on the face of the planet, said, let's go. Take our 2 children, and we went to Connecticut. And all I could think about is how do we do it. It took me 7 years to even get to the point where I could even think about doing Child's Garden Dreams. And so I went to my department chair after being there for 7 years. And I don't know if any of you in here know Dorothy Payne. She was one of the greatest individuals I've ever known. And Dorothy said, as I was probably in there asking for money or something, I don't know. But she asked me, so what are you playing on your concert? And I said, Child's Garden of Dreams. And she said, who wrote it? And I said, David Maslanka. She said, would you like to have him here? My heart stopped. I was in Spokane, Washington, listening to a cassette tape. Now I'm in Connecticut. She said, you want to have him here? I said, can you do that? She says, yeah, he was roommates with my husband at University. So he came. I'll finish this story really quick. There's a lot to it, but he came to rehearsal, and that kindness, you hear it, you can hear it. I can remember about that. But he said he loved the band. First 2 movements, loved it. We got to the 3rd movement. You know, Child's Garden of Dreams marked about 160 to 180. I don't know. It was like a bad fast, okay? So we started it. He stopped me. I didn't even get 2 measures, and he stopped me just like that. He said, it's too slow. My band is sitting right where you are. My eyeballs are this big. And my heart is pounding. And I'm going like, what am I supposed to do now? He says it's about 120. I said, no, it's not about 120. It's exactly 120. And so he said, it's got to go faster. It's not marked 120. It's marked 160, 120, whatever. And I said to him, this conversation is happening live. And I don't know what to do to myself. I'm intimidated by him. I'm intimidated by his memory. But he said to me, he said, it's got to go faster. And I said, if we go any faster, we're going to miss a ton of notes. And he said, so be it. We'll sweep them up after the concert. And I said, you better bring a bushel basket. And then he said this to me, and this changed my life. And this is hard for me to tell you. I've told it many times. But he looked at me, and he said, don't impose your restrictions on my music. I learned a lot right there. A lifetime of trying to understand him, be his servant. That's my beginning.
Matthew has graciously informed me that David was a Buddhist priest, especially toward the later years of his life. And my question to all the panelists, whoever feels comfortable answering, is, to your knowledge, how did David's study of history, philosophy, and religion impact his music, either generally or specifically?
Dad was an enormous student of history. He loved, he was a Lincoln scholar, read deeply into World War II, especially into the Holocaust experience. But generally speaking, he was fascinated with how people interacted with each other and how they changed and transformed through struggle, and how they came to peace after struggle. And when he came, he was always kind of dancing around the core tenets of Buddhist thought, coming from his early work with Hume and his deep active meditation and his walking meditation. And when he discovered the community in Missoula, it was as though there was a structure for his understanding of the world that made sense in a really deep, profound way. The leader of the particular community is a Vietnamese man named Thich Nhat Hanh, and he's deeply concerned with breathing. Talks about the breath sutra, or the sutra on breathing, as being one of the most important aspects of the practice. And it's an astonishingly simple and profound thing, which has deep resonance for making music, especially wind music. So the most simple exercise is breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. So I'll try that right now. Just a minute. In through the nose. Through the mouth. In through the nose. And out through the mouth. And as you pay attention to the motion of the air, as the air touches your nose, as it goes into your lungs, you feel how good that feels, how amazing just being alive and being aware of being alive is. And then you take that manyfold as you make music with yourself, you make that vibration of sound, and you make it with other people. It's, we get to do an extraordinary thing every day. And Dad is deeply connected and interested in that feeling and that method of communication and self-understanding.
I might just add a little bit to that. All this, I think, took place after I had left Missoula, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of it. But you know, David did a lot of meditating, as Matthew said, and of course, meditation is a big part of Buddhism, so I think it's a natural progression. And while David's music has always had meditative aspects to it in sections, I think it became increasingly more so in the later years. And David used to talk to me about this notion of being totally present in the moment. And, you know, in our crazy lives, I mean, how often are we totally present? We're always multitasking, doing all these things, trying to figure out what's next. And so maybe, and I'm just hypothesizing here, but maybe he was trying to help us as individuals, or maybe as a community, that we try to find the mental discipline to figure out what it truly is to be singular in a space and a time, and to be totally present in that moment. And being around David a lot, you could see it all the time, that he was just so present in that moment.
You know, when you're talking being present in the moment, oftentimes he would start rehearsals by waiting for absolute silence. It takes a while. Like percussionists have to fiddle the snare, or pull the reed, or whatever you're doing. And gradually, everybody would look up and go, wait, shouldn't we be doing something yet? Well, yeah. Take that time to create this open, sacred space within which the sound can blossom, where you can create that music. And that ground of being, this communal space that we've created, is an extraordinary thing.
Gary or Mallory, would you like to add anything? All right, the next question I have for the panelists. It's very common for people to state that David had strong and immediate chemistry with people, both conductors, performers, audiences. What do you believe was the driving force behind that and that ability to connect, if you can articulate it?
For me, I don't think that I could articulate that. I don't know. I learned more from David Maslanka than anybody. And I love him forever. Just because of his steadfastness. Never wavered. Was always steady. But I couldn't articulate why that I have this strong feeling. I love Mahler. I had the great, I would talk to David about this. I had a great opportunity to conduct a symphony at the university, Mahler 1. And I thought I was ready to conduct Mahler 1. And turns out I wasn't. I had to work 2 years to get to the point where I could even begin. First thing on the page is If the Sound of Nature when I'm sitting in Miami. I wrote this years ago. But that music, if you listen to it, will change you from who you are to who you will become. For me, it is a culmination of everything that I've been blessed to be a part of all my life to this point. And David came for me at the right time. I firmly believe that we are who we are because that's who we're supposed to be. But I couldn't articulate the deep, deep commitment to the sound. I mean, how it made your gut hurt. You know, it's like you want to say something to somebody so badly. You have it, and it's right on the tip of your tongue, and you want to say it, but the words won't come, and it breaks your heart just a little bit. That's how it felt. Still does. But that time when he said, "Don't impose your restriction," he denies he said that. It wasn't quite as rough as I make it sound, but he did say that, and I heard it. And from that moment forward, it was all about what's my role here? Who am I? And what decisions you're going to make. So he's taught me all those things. So when David came, just at the right time for me. But that's the best I can do.
Well, I knew Emily was going to ask that question, and I thought a lot about that and tried to articulate it, and I couldn't either. This connection that David would have to people. But then I remembered in one of my interviews, he spoke about that. So if I hate to do this, but if I'll just read something he said to me in that interview. And he says here, what I have to do is to look inward and to see the people in the performance situation for whom the piece is being written. I do a meditative process, and what I simply do is evoke the image of the person who has asked me to write the piece. And I look at them in a meditative way, very closely. Then some things are shown to me. There's a sense of awareness of how the person is and feels, and an opening to what the musical ensemble feels like. And when I'm composing on the piece, all the time I'm referring back to the mental image that I have of the performance actually taking place.
Wanted to add, I think the connection that Dad was able to make is about how focused and present he was in that moment. When you were talking with him, it was you and him, and no one else. he cared deeply about you. He wanted to hear who you were and how you were. He was so quiet in his own mind and his own self that he was able to create a space for other people to come forward into that space and to become more truly themselves.
I just want to add to that. I mean, that's it. That's it. There's music that we can conduct, that we can study, that we can perform, that will make us better musicians. And then there's music that we can conduct, study, and perform that will make us better people. And what you're describing about your dad is the thing that would help us to become better people, all of us.
So as you can see on the slide that I have here, this was provided by Matthew as an image of David walking through nature. And it's known that David spent quite a bit of time walking and thinking and meditating. As I think you know, many of you know or can imagine, living in Missoula, he was a lover of nature and all of its splendor. So the next question to the panelists is, do you have any recollection, ideas, or stories that David shared with you, or observations of his relationship with nature or walking that you're willing to share with us?
Dad took a walk up Blue Mountain most every day. It's about 2 or 3 miles from the studio. It's in, this is in Missoula, Montana. It's western Montana. It's the middle of the Rocky Mountains. It's a beautiful area. And he would walk most of the same paths. He had it was like 4 or 5 paths that he would go up. He would have about an hour's walk up and down. And he would have trees that he made friends with. And there was the big tree at the top of the hill that he would touch and say hi to. And he'd walk back down. There's a phrase from St. Augustine that he used as a watchword, which is solvitur ambulantum. It is solved by walking. It's named with one of the movements in saxophone and marimba piece. And it is absolutely true. If you have a problem that you cannot figure out, if you beat your head against this thing and over and over and over and over again, go for a walk. It really helps. And what is composing but beating your head against the universe, trying to be open enough to it, to have it, to be able to distill its secrets, and then try to figure out how to translate that into scribbles on paper. You go for a walk, and all of a sudden, it's like you have sand of different densities in a jar. And going for a walk, you shake the jar, and it all just kind of separates out. And you go, oh, well, that was easy. So, it's kind of a magical thing.
I have one thing I could share. I think it was December of '93 here in Chicago, the Midwest, and this is right before the premiere of Symphony 4 was going to take place. And Jerry had arranged to have a meeting with David, with all of us PAs and such, and we were in a hotel room, and we're all sitting on the floor, and we're basically going through the score and asking David questions. And it came to the second section, which is, the second section is where Old 100 comes in, but it begins with what he referred to as nature music. And there's this C major chord with an added 6, and it kind of creates this really, what he would call the hum of nature kind of a feeling. And then on top of that, there's all these little nature sounds. And he used the term, he was trying to describe green on green, and that's from these walks and all the different colored greens that he saw. And I thought I understood what that meant at the time, but then I, of course, got to be in Montana, and that first spring, I made a point of going out and walking and trying to find some of the trails that David had walked on. And you have to understand that winters are long in Montana, so spring is this amazing thing. And it's just this rebirth of life. And so I was walking up the Rattlesnake along the creek there, and there's grasses in the meadows of all different lengths and shades of green and bushes, and then the leaves are coming green. And then this image of that green on green really made sense to me at that point. And every time I listen to that section of that music now, it really takes on this almost spatial, three-dimensional feel of all these different subtle shades of green. It's really a special thing.
One more thing about nature. We moved to Montana from New York City in 1990. And if you're familiar with the progression of his music, in the 70s and 80s, it's deeply angular and angry and like vicious stuff. Child's Garden of Dreams is a deeply uncomfortable piece with only brief glimmers of serenity. But in 90, you start to see the rise of a more tranquil and settled man. One of the very first pieces he wrote after getting there is called Golden Light. Some of you may know it. And it's a very clearly tied to the land. So his walks and the transformation in there directly affect the music.
Can everyone read this slide here? This is a quote from David directly. I thought it would be a nice segue into talking about how we can now recreate and interpret, or have some considerations for interpreting David's music. So my question to the panelists, can you share some ideas? Many of you have performed lots of his pieces, several works. Can you share ideas, either specific, technical, kind of, checklist considerations, and then also just personal considerations that you take, knowing the man, knowing yourself, and how you want to recreate his music? Because now that he's gone, it's our responsibility to find this in ourselves, to, I think, recreate it to the best of our ability, the way he wants it, but also the way we want it. So it's a big open-ended question, but panelists, provide your insight and your experiences into how we can move forward in interpreting his scores.
I'll dive into that pool. I think that there are so many wonderful clues in the way the scores look, and that it's in his hand, and the words that he uses. And to hear you talk about the green on green, right? It's all right there. I mean, it really is. It's all right there. And I think that with David's music, as with the music of any other composer that we're going to conduct, we have a responsibility to create a relationship with that composer and to use all of the tools at hand in order to do that. So that's empathizing with his experiences. And I love hearing you talk about the box and the green on green, and it's all in music. You can hear it, you can see it. And so the more we can, from our own experiences, empathize with that and be open to really, in many ways, the simplicity of what is right in front of us, the better that all is going to be a guide to us in coming to really a pure and simple interpretation of these meaningful ideas that he's expressing.
Just a couple of things. Can you hear one of David's melodies in your mind right now? Aren't they great? I mean, he was attuned. He knew how to write a melody, and they stick with you forever, and you don't forget them. And if you can't think of one, it'd be a good idea to grab tape or something and listen to it fairly quickly to get it in there because it will help you just love everything even more. But he always put those 16 notes under there, didn't he? You start messing with those 16 notes and you're in trouble. So she's right. It's pretty straight. It's easy to read. I have something to show you. I've got hundreds of pages of letters from David. Hundreds. And I went through all of them just to reacquaint myself with him and opportunity to come talk to you. I think all of us, we could say one thing that would make you, help you love music more and love this composer more. Our mission will fall directly on the center of the target. So it's through trial and tribulation that David often came to that comfort place. So we were working on Symphony number 4. And do you know the jazz thing on the doxology? It was difficult for me not only to teach, but it was difficult for me to understand. Thank you, Matthew.
You got it.
And I will remind Matthew that the first time I met him, he did not have that beard, and he was swinging on a tire. And his dad only became interested in euphonium when he became a euphonium.
You may be surprised that there are several euphonium solos in Dad's works. It's super excellent.
So I asked David about that jazz bit, and I said, why is it there? And it was after a long rehearsal. He was tired, I was tired, and you know, timing is everything. I mean, I picked the wrong minute again. And I said, but it was on my mind, and I said, what is that? He said, I'll talk to you in the morning. And he got out of the car, went to his room, and the next morning I came back to get him, and he gave me the reason why it couldn't be anything but that. And when you read it, how many of you guys have written this much freehand in the last 2 years? We have email and text. He wrote. That means something. That means something more than hitting the button. And I read it. And I said, okay, I'll do the best I can. By the way, I never walked with him. But I found out he was in a lot better shape than I was when I would walk with him.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I think Matthew did a nice job of creating a guide for that. But I just want to maybe highlight 2 things. David's music is all about the flow of energy and the emotional line that it creates. And tempo and the ability to sustain the intensity of a sound is paramount in making that happen. One of the things I really love about David's music, he could really build up to a moment. And one of the challenges is then once you have all that that energy, where does it go? So I can speak to Symphony 4. A critical aspect of that piece is the transitional material and how careful you have to be when you think about the energy level. And it's so many different things that create that energy, but how to make that transition and flow throughout the 27 minutes of the piece. So whatever musical parameter you're thinking about, look at it through the eye maybe of maintaining that emotional line and that energy that's there.
Yeah, and I'd just like to call your attention. Now you may look at your handouts. So the first page, special thanks to Gary Green for providing many notes, letters. I think many of you know that David was known for handwriting letters. I remember as a graduate student at Northwestern, Dr. Thompson would share some of the handwritten letters that he would provide after sharing recordings, and especially, 2000 whatever, someone taking the time to handwrite these letters was just beautiful. And I don't know of any other composer that took that much time. I'm sure there were, but he was just very much known for that. And I'm sure many of you that have reached out and worked with David received similar kinds of letters. My own really quick personal story, I recorded Desert Roads with Ricardo Morales at Temple University in the clarinet concerto. I'm a clarinet player myself, and absolutely that whole process was beyond moving. And I shared that recording with him when we were all done, and he wrote a note to me as well. Of course, I was very excited to receive that. But he's very much known for that, and Gary was generous enough to share several notes with us, and what you see on your handout are some of the highlights that I picked. And as Gary shared with you, he had hundreds and hundreds of letters, so I hope you can resonate with some of his ideas and thoughts. And then on the next page, you'll see that Matthew compiled, you could argue that it's kind of a performance practice document for interpreting his music. And actually, what I'd like to just call your attention to is the order of which the content is delivered. You're going to know that note accuracy is not at the top of the list. And again, this is just a guide. It's certainly not to say you can't put your own interpretation. Obviously, we must, as recreative artists. But I think it's an interesting way to perhaps, especially for folks that maybe haven't explored his music much yet, and you're just on the verge of studying his scores, this might be a nice way to start and just to know a little bit about how he viewed his music. So I have one more question for Matthew, and then we'll talk a little bit about the website and the foundation. Matthew shared with me that David's lifelong quest was to learn and to know his interior self. Matthew, can you elaborate on this and illuminate any short and brief relevant family information, given this beautiful photo that you shared with us with your sister here?
Yeah. So that's me on the left, looking much cuter. My brother Stephen, my mom Allison, and dad. This is probably 1988, thereabouts, and you can tell by the chain link fence that we're in New York City. Dad's life was an enormous struggle for large parts of the early years, leading to alcoholism, chain smoking, deep depression. He had a nervous breakdown in 1979. And it was a deeply chaotic and miserable time for him and the people around him. But through it all, the music is how he expressed the difficulties that he was going through and how he could grapple with the world. As he came to Jung through therapy, through group therapy sessions. And to be able to understand the deep archetypes of the human mind was Jung's lifelong goal, coming from Freud. And there's a deep mystery of consciousness. There's a deep mystery of being human. And he grappled with it because he had to, because he was drowning, because the world was just impossible to deal with. But through that, he's able to discover breathing. He's able to discover meditation. He's able to discover how to find the energy to move through and transform and become a more aware and centered and quiet person. My mom is probably the best thing that ever happened to him. Where he lived in the clouds, she had her feet on the ground. She made it so that he could live, so that he could write. She's the one who called Carl Fisher when the royalty check was late she's the one who answered the phone when the band director called. Many of the band directors who worked with Dad over the last 40 years knew Mom. Like, you called her and talked with her, and while you waited for Dad to come out from the shop. And she was his business manager, his rock, his stability. And she paid a lot of the price for that. She was sick a lot. And she never really grasped a lot of the things that she wanted to do when she was younger. And it was only later in life, after I left, my sister and brother left, and Dad was stable, that she started living her own life. And I'm sad that she left us just in the bloom of her second flower. Mom and Dad both died within a month of each other in 2017, with seemingly no symptoms of, Mom was, a little tired, okay, kind of feeling real, oh, it's not really good, well, let's go to the hospital, oh, it's real bad. And then Dad was a little tired, and Mom was in the hospital, so, well, why don't we get checked out too? And stage 4 cancer. The speech that we saw at the beginning is from April of 2017. This is the last trip he took out to heart school with Glenn Atzett. You would never know anything was wrong. He was strong, cogent, clear, and the photos from April and the photos from June, one is a healthy man and one is a dying man. And it was very difficult to deal with.
Thank you for sharing that, Matthew. Before we leave the session, would you mind talking a little bit about the foundation? And
Sure.
you'll see briefly here, I think many of you know that David has an incredibly comprehensive website. If you're not aware of that, just write that link down. But you may not know that a new foundation has been formed, and there's a link on that website. So we just have 2 minutes here, Matthew, if you want to share what's
Okay.
the foundation.
So Gary mentioned that he has a stack of letters 3 feet high from Dad, which I'm needing to get my hands on. The two very quick points. Dad wrote all his letters longhand. He also wrote all his scores longhand. He used pencil, paper, and staff paper, and a piano. And that's it. For any composers who are in the room, and for any who are teaching composers, there's really no substitute for having direct contact through the channeling that you're doing with the music, through your hand to the paper as you write it. This requires you to internalize the music. It requires you to audiate and create it yourself. This is not to say that legitimate and valuable music cannot be made through external means. Creating on a computer is very much like sculpting. Like you build blocks of sound and you mold it and you change it, and that's interesting and cool, and you can do really neat things there. But the way Dad did it, and the way that it's required to interpret the music comes from inside and then is directed outward. So the letters here. The Maslanka Foundation, I started with my brother and sister. We are, our primary mission is archiving. We want to get every piece of paper that Dad ever touched, every video ever taken of him, every audio of every concert he was at, frankly, every audio of every performance that's ever been made. This is I'm going to get to this at some point, right? It's a It's a large job. But what we can do is ask for your help. If you have a letter, if you have a recording, if you have a VHS from 1984 in a box somewhere, we want it. Digital files, emails, photos, anything you have. There will be a link at davidmaslanka.com that goes up probably tonight, where you can upload the files, give some description about what there were, what the context was. We are gathering it all, cataloging it, sorting it, scanning every one of his scores, all of his artwork, all of the, we're 3D scanning his studio. And, going layer by layer, so you can see the strata of how he worked and how he understood. There are sketches and sketches and sketches, stacks of sketches that need to be analyzed through date, what piece they're about, and how they go through. We have just published the 10th Symphony with a manuscript edition alongside with his original sketches that I was working from. I finished his symphony after he died. The sketches there are there more than could fit in a single piece. And there are such extraordinary glimpses into his mind. So, this is to ask for your help to search your closets, search your hard drives. I am findable, and we would like it all, please.
Panelists, thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights.